Hello, folks. Welcome back. This is Chris, once again in central Pennsylvania. Perhaps the most consequential political meeting in the political life of President Cyril Ramaphosa is about to take place in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday this week. Ramaphosa and his delegation of ministers are coming to Washington to talk to the Trump administration, President Trump, to discuss the difficult, tense relations between Washington and Pretoria, which, from my perspective, are almost entirely of Pretoria's making. But they seem not to understand that they're responsible for this. Now, I have some grave concerns about this meeting. This is more important, in my view, than Ramaphosa's role in the Convention for Democratic South Africa back in the early 1990s, and more important than his ability to ascend to the presidency of the African National Congress in late 2017. This meeting could make or break South Africa. What's at risk? Well, many things are at risk here with this relationship, not the least of which is South Africa's economy limping along at less than 1% of GDP growth annually, which puts it behind inflation and behind population growth and is a disastrous situation for South Africa's citizens. So what is at risk here? Well, the United States trade with South Africa, two-way trade, is in excess of $20 billion on average per year. That represents 4 or 5% of South Africa's GDP. Should Ramaphosa come across in the wrong fashion and irritate Donald Trump, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that the United States could begin to sanction South Africa for its conduct and its actions contrary to the interests of the United States, its friends, its partners, and its allies. So, can you afford to lose 4 to 5% of your GDP overnight? I doubt that. That would put the rand in free fall and also lead to catastrophic consequences for South Africa. The United States has generously allowed South Africa, although it's illegitimately a part of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, to remain in the AGOA tariff-free situation for several years, despite the fact that in 2018, the parliament introduced expropriation without compensation, debated it, tested it, inquired about it, and eventually, in December of 2024, Ramaphosa secretively signed the Expropriation Without Compensation Act into law, thereby abrogating private property rights and undermining the rule of law from U.S. perspective. In order to qualify for Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, you must respect private property rights. Therefore, South Africa has not been eligible since 2018. However, the United States has allowed them to continue in this program, having duty-free access, which has been a huge benefit for South Africa's industry. A country that's busy deindustrializing has been limping along, and most of its value-added exports are going to places like Western Europe and the United States. So, 141,000 automotive industry jobs by South African economists' own estimates are at risk with the loss of 25,533 automobiles exported to the United States duty-free. Now, before we get to reciprocal tariffs, which are a mess for South Africa, AGOA is dead letter. The automotive industry advocacy group NAMSA seems to think that AGOA is still in the cards. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not aware of any legislation in the House or the Senate that's proposed to renew AGOA, which expires on the 30th of September 2025. And with it goes all the duty-free access to the U.S. market, affecting over $3 billion of South African exports to the United States, giving them an artificial advantage over BMWs and others shipping to the United States. So that's just a foretaste of what's at risk for Ramaphosa and for the South African delegation as it comes to the United States. Your wine industry, your agricultural products, citruses, things like that come to the United States are gravely at risk as well. So how will South Africa deal with this? Well, we'll have to see how Ramaphosa and his delegation approach this meeting with Trump and other officials in Washington, D.C. But I do not think it's going to go well. They are deluding themselves, believing that the problem is simply that Donald Trump is misinformed, that he does not understand what's happening in South Africa, that it's simply a mistake. They're going to harp on Trump's recent use of the word genocide for South Africa, which is unfortunate because while South Africa has advanced down the path of genocide against white South Africans, it has not reached that stage. Of course, if you wait until genocide is committed, it's a bit late to do something. So Trump is taking preventive action here to help Afrikaners and ethnic minorities escape South Africa's fragile security environment by coming to America under the U.S. refugee program. So that's in advance of genocide. So perhaps from some standpoints, politically, it's unfortunate Donald Trump has used the term genocide, but it's not entirely inappropriate because the steps to reach a genocide have clearly been taking place in South Africa with the isolation, the denigration, the attacks on ethnic minorities, particularly Afrikaners, but not exclusively. Coloreds, Indians, and white South Africans are also the targets of politicians, of policies, and of laws in South Africa meant to impoverish and punish South African minorities, especially whites, for what? For apartheid? Most white South Africans were born after the end of apartheid. The only national government they've ever known is the African National Congress, and now the Government of National Unity, led by the ANC. So punishing white South Africans is counterproductive and morally reprehensible. It's no better than what the apartheid government did to the majority population during its time. So Ramaphosa has three potential outcomes here. First, he manages not to make the situation worse. Now that's hard to imagine, even when he tries to turn on his teddy bear charm to Donald Trump. I don't think he's going to be able to make the situation stay the same. But even if the situation remains the same, that's not a good outcome for South Africa. South Africa squandered 6 weeks. 3 months are available to negotiate with the Trump administration a bilateral agreement to reduce these reciprocal tariffs that Trump has imposed on most countries back to a bilateral agreement with no tariffs or reduced tariffs. But what has happened? 6 weeks have been squandered. South Africa's president named Mcebisi Jonas to be a special envoy to the United States, but he sits in Cape Town, yet to arrive in the United States. 6 weeks of this 3-month period, temporarily suspending these reciprocal tariffs, have expired. And not a single representative from South Africa's government has approached the U.S. government to negotiate a trade deal. Only 6 weeks remain. And the Trump administration this week indicated that they're tired of negotiating with countries for bilateral deals. They're just going to impose a flat tariff on every country based on their own view. And that's potentially tragic for South Africa. You're going to go from 0 import duties to at least 10%, possibly more. Why? Because you failed to send a trade representative. So Ramaphosa is a bit late to the game, arriving now. So I doubt that status quo is going to be good for South Africa. It's going to be bad. So that's one outcome. Another outcome is that he insults Trump yet again with his arrogance and his ignorance. Not a good idea to tell Trump that he's misinformed. We spend tens of billions of dollars in the United States on intelligence activities and agencies. And our president is well informed about what is happening and what is not happening in South Africa. So telling him that he doesn't know what's going on is not a winning approach. And blaming the situation on Elon Musk and Starlink is stupid because it has nothing to do with the fragile relationship between the U.S. and South African diplomatic. The actions of the African National Congress of the past 15 years or so are the reason why this relationship is so fragile and at risk. Trump knows what's going on in South Africa. And no amount of, well, you're misinformed or there is no genocide, whites are not discriminated against. How do you explain 142 laws against ethnic minorities? How do you explain new labor laws that limit the number of managers in employment in private companies to just 4% white males? That's racism, that's bigotry, and that's your law that you're putting in place. Now, the third option here is that Cyril pulls a rabbit out of his hat that mollifies Trump to hold off on targeted sanctions with light concessions to Trump. Perhaps he'll say that we'll try to scrap the EWC, the expropriation without compensation, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Cyril Ramaphosa is not a humble man. And I believe strongly that this will be a disastrous visit to Washington, D.C. At best, it's going to maintain status quo, but it's not really going to move the needle. He's brought a team of not A team or B team, but the D-listers with him. He's brought John Steenhuisen, who's attacked his own Afrikaner people in South Africa, who has aligned himself with agribusiness at the expense of small farmers, and has lost all credibility as leader of the Democratic Alliance. Why is he there? Is he the token whitey? Is that what it is? Then you've got Parks Tao, who's pushing for a 3% black tax. He's probably the most credible of the people on the trip, but that's not going to fly with Trump because that's racist. On the top of that, you've got Ntshavheni Khumbudzo, the minister in the presidency, who's threatening South Africans with treason charges for criticizing the government of the day. This is Soviet-esque. She's also accused of massive corruption, and the Trump administration also has an issue with the corruption going on in South Africa. Do you really think that's a winning attitude or winning message? And then, look, we'll just stop there. The ministers, Ronnie Lamola. I forgot about Ronnie Lamola. Let's just get the last one there. Little Ronnie Lamola, a serial liar. Virtually everything the man says is a fairy tale coming out of his mouth. Everything he says. A failed justice minister, and now a failed foreign minister, who is not going to move the needle at all. The U.S. government officials are going to be astounded at the stupidity and ignorance of the people in this delegation who know nothing about geopolitics and know nothing about the political situation in the United States. You should send people that actually know what's going on in Washington, not people that are drinking the Kool-Aid of the National Executive Committee of the ANC. Therefore, my expectation is things are going to go sideways at best. I think there's very little chance that Ramaphosa will be dismissed out of hand or rasooled out of the country, but there's a very good chance that he will be Zelensky. If Ramaphosa chooses to be as dumb as Volodymyr Zelensky and use his press conference after the meeting as a platform to spew his propaganda, like he lied in front of the world in New York on Bloomberg when he was interviewed in 2018 saying Donald Trump was misinformed. There are no farm murders in South Africa. Well, that's absolutely ludicrous. There are farm murders all over the world. But to lie about it is stupid. And then he lied and said there are no farm murders. There are no white farmers being murdered. Well, that's factually untrue. Approximately 4,000 white farmers and their family members have been murdered. Not to mention thousands of black farm workers, black farm managers, black farm owners, Indians and coloreds that have also been murdered on farms in the most barbaric and sickening fashion since 1994. So Ramaphosa lied to the world. Do the people in the ANC think that the United States has forgotten the treatment, the shabby treatment they gave to the Dalai Lama? Why do you treat the Dalai Lama so shabbily? He was coming to South Africa for an international racism conference, and you did not give him a visa because the Chinese communists told you not to do it. We haven't forgotten that. Have you forgotten the Article 98 waiver that you refused to sign to protect U.S. troops under the Rome Statute because we're not a signatory? We haven't forgotten that. Training Chinese People's Liberation Army combat fighter pilots at South African flying academies, using U.S. and NATO personnel to do the training, to train Chinese communist pilots to shoot down American planes. Do you think we've forgotten that? The Lady R. The list of grievances goes on and on. This is not about Donald Trump. This is not about the Republicans. And this is sure as hell not about Elon Musk. This is about the actions of the ANC. South Africa is a sovereign country, and the ANC is welcome to take whatever actions they like that are legal and moral and ethical. But when they take actions that run contrary to the interests of the United States, its friends, its partners, allies, at some point, we're just fools if we continue to accept the threats, the arrogance, and the actions counter to our interests. And that's the stage we're at now. Unless the ANC recognizes their actions are the reason for this breach, unless there's humility and an effort to be collegial, this will go very badly, very badly. And that's my take on the upcoming meeting between President Trump and Ramaphosa. It could go well, wouldn't hold my breath. It could go terribly. That sounds like the most likely outcome, or it would be status quo. I don't think any of these outcomes is good for South Africa or for South Africans. And I feel very badly for South Africa. I wish them well, and I hope that the meeting goes well, but I'm not going to hold my breath because I'd simply pass out and fall on the ground right here before something changes. What say you, South Africa, South Africa, Mzansi? What say you, world? Hey, states, Americans, what do you say about this relationship with South Africa? Cheers, everyone. God bless.